Hi everyone, welcome to our Channel K. Douglas Macgregor asserts that Tucker Carlson's recent actions display remarkable courage, garnering around 120,000 views online. He suggests that while Carlson's initiative was necessary, only Carlson himself could have accomplished it. However, Macgregor warns that Carlson faces significant threats. As a consequence, he anticipates governmental retaliation, emphasizing the pervasive bitterness within Washington, D.C., where speaking the truth is unpopular. Macgregor bluntly states that Ukraine is in ruins and that additional funds allocated to the country serve primarily to maintain a facade. He alleges that such funds often end up lining the pockets of donors, constituents, and defense industries rather than benefiting Ukraine directly. Now, how much of that really reaches anybody? He's so tired of reading about brigade commanders and battalion commanders who keep people on the rolls who are mid because they want a pocket cash that comes in to pay them in the field. And this, of course, deprives widows and relatives of any cash they might otherwise get from the government. The place wallows in a sea of corruption to the point of being nauseating. But in Washington, D.C., the place where nobody speaks the truth and we are always victorious and successful, and no one will admit that the war is lost. Whatever happened 2 weeks ago, 2 years ago, or 2 decades ago doesn't matter. It's only what's going on right now. This has gotten us into a lot of trouble. So he thinks it was a good thing. He certainly did a great job on the Cyrus history. He upset him somewhat because he glossed over the tens of millions of human beings murdered by communism beginning in 1918. He didn't bother to talk about any of that. He did not. We tried to create this illusion that everything was, although Hitler's idea, complete failure to understand, to even mention Stalin's role and the role of communism. Frankly, if you go back and look at Hitler's rise to power, it was largely in response to fear of communism. He was seen in Germany as the only one who could stand up to it and prevent Germany from falling into the hands of communists. And of course, Stalin was only too eager to jump on board and invade Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, and eastern Poland. And there was no discussion of the 15 million Poles that disappeared in eastern Poland and various peoples that disappeared in the Baltic states as well. And Finland's loss? That was the only thing that bothered him, because he really do believe that at some point Russia has to come to terms with this. It's never really been through this arduous, gut-wrenching process of understanding just how terrible that period of life was. But now, having said that, if I had been in his shoes, or if he had asked me for my opinion, I would have said, don't waste your time talking about anything that happened before 1991 and start with 1992. Emphasize that Russia is not a communist country. It's not a communist society. It has rediscovered its Russian Orthodox Christian roots. The society is a very healthy society, and Russia is booming economically now. That's not because of anything we've done. We've done everything we could to harm Russia, and then he could talk, know how it has failed and why it has failed. He didn't do that. He did some of it. He did recount what happened in the lead-up to 2022, February, in the intervention, and I think he was somewhat successful there. I think the most successful part, though, was when he talked about the nature of the Russian soul, and he depicted the Russian people as a spiritual society. And even though he was asked, do you think you see the hand of Providence or God behind things? And I don't speak Russian. I don't know how that was translated. I don't know how his comments were translated. And he said rather flippantly, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I really think he was talking about that. But he was also talking about interests, the interests of Russia, the interests of other states in Europe. On the whole, I think it was a tremendous success because here's a man who is almost 71 who speaks fluidly without the need of any notes. No one has to whisper in his ear what he should or shouldn't say or what he needs to know, and he has a sense of humor. That was evident. Yeah, he laughed over certain things, especially the question about artificial intelligence, which I thought was a great response. I mean, why are we wasting hot air on that subject here? So I think, on the whole, he did extremely well. Anybody who bothers to look at him, listen to him, and then compare him with the people in the West has got to be very disappointed in what we have in the West. Nobody shares that sentiment. It's a stark reflection on the system. The contrast between what they claim versus their actions, regardless of whether you approve of their governance, holds little significance. That's a point I hope resonated with people. We must refrain from interfering in the affairs of others. As he pointed out, he questioned why we involve ourselves in Ukraine, urging us to focus on our domestic issues. Instead, he emphasized that how other nations govern themselves is their own business. We must begin to foster respect for different cultures, ways of life, and perspectives, rather than imposing our values as universal truths. It's ironic to consider that Putin, representing Russia, is making valid arguments, while Tucker, not an official government representative, speaks for the American people. Our government's behavior mirrors aspects of the old Soviet regime, stifling opposition, eschewing debate, and silencing dissent. It's perplexing to think that Russia, emerging from decades of communism, may possess a healthier mindset than the United States does today. Despite our successful avoidance of that path, he was attempting to emphasize that the Russian state has maintained its existence since 932 without delving into every war or campaign fought throughout history. These significant achievements of the Russian people underscore their endurance. His message was clear. Russia has stood the test of time since 932 and will continue to endure for another millennium. While many Americans may not grasp this concept, I certainly did. Reflecting on my trip to Europe in 1968, which my grandfather gifted me for my 15th birthday, I recall spending most of my time in Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Croatia, Slovenia, and Austria. Despite my young age and limited German proficiency, I stumbled upon the U.S. Embassy, displaying images of the damage caused by the Vietnam War. A Hungarian passerby, upon seeing the images, expressed skepticism. When I asked for his opinion, I inquired about Hungary's future and the potential withdrawal of Soviet forces. His response, echoing Putin's recent statement, albeit in a different context, resonated deeply. We Hungarians have been here for a long time. The Turks were here for 300 years. They are gone. We are still here. When the Soviets are gone, we will still be here, echoing the same message. This notion can be challenging to grasp because of our youthfulness and the dramatic shifts in our national identity and character. As you've highlighted, the deliberate dilution of the values we once held dear has led to many Americans, including ourselves, feeling like minorities within our own country. There's a growing sentiment that it's more commendable to identify as anything other than American, almost a form of reverse nationalism. We're undergoing a process of denationalization, yet it's puzzling why more of us aren't outraged or distressed. Perhaps our prolonged prosperity has blinded us to the sacrifices and efforts required to build our scientific, industrial, and agricultural foundations. Even now, our military strength rests largely on the legacy of the Cold War, with minimal adaptation to contemporary challenges in international relations and military capabilities. Reflecting on Ukraine, one might wonder if we've gleaned any lessons privately. Some acknowledge that there's much to learn, but the sad truth is that we haven't. Consider the recent incident in the Black Sea, where Ukrainian forces damaged a Russian landing ship. Despite such events, it seems the U.S. Navy's surface fleet remains stagnant, clinging to outdated ship designs, vulnerable to modern threats. Yet voices like Mike Turner on the Intelligence Committee continue to amplify the narrative of imminent threats, often originating from Russia. Without substantial evidence, this cycle of fear-mongering and complacency persists, recycled and repackaged repeatedly. It begs the question, when will Americans awaken to these realities? Unfortunately, it seems we haven't reached that point yet, and one can only hope that our awakening won't come through harsher means. Well, it's important to consider that much of the equipment earmarked for Ukraine won't arrive for at least a year. Our war reserves are significantly depleted, leaving little available to send to Ukraine at the moment. The allocation of funds to defense industries serves to build future assets, although it's widely understood that by the time this material reaches Ukraine, it won't significantly alter the outcome. President Putin is likely aware of this reality, given the capabilities of his intelligence services. Thus, it's crucial to acknowledge that, at least temporarily, there's no receptive audience for him in Washington, likely extending well beyond the next election. In this context, it might be pragmatic for him to shift focus, determine his objectives, and engage with European counterparts instead.